Chapter 17. TheSnowQueen. The granny sailed steadily through the night sky. They had been flying for a few hours now, and the initial excitement had worn off and been replaced with anticipation for the journey ahead. They were flying somewhere above the northern kingdom, and the snowy northern mountains came into view on the horizon. The farther north they traveled, the colder it became. The twins were so thankful Red had given them fur coats to wear, despite whom the fur used to belong to. Froggy was still clutching the steering wheel. He looked like a little boy, too excited to let it go. Red leaned on the banister facing west. She kept looking over her shoulder as if to ask someone a question. "Are you all right, my love?" Froggy asked her. "Yes, darling, I'll be fine," Red said. "I keep thinking of things for my handmaid to do for me and forget she's not here. I forgot what it's like to go without help." Jack and Goldilocks were seated near the front of the ship. Goldilocks sharpened her swords and Jack sharpened his axe as the twins joined them. "So what can you tell us about the Snow Queen?" Connor said. "On a scale of kitten to tiger, what kind of danger are we talking?" "It's hard to say," Jack said. "The Snow Queen has been out of the public eye for so long. No one has seen her in decades." "Really?" Alex asked, always eager for a good story. "I'm not very familiar with her." Jack went to full-throttle storytelling mode, dramatically retelling the events that had made the Snow Queen a household name. Many years ago, the Snow Queen was just a weather witch from deep in the mountains. She befriended the king of the Northern Kingdom and granted him wishes and gained his trust by giving him prophecies about the kingdom. The king made her his royal advisor, but she was evil and secretly planned to take over the kingdom for herself. Eventually, she overthrew the king and imprisoned the entire kingdom in an everlasting winter. All the trees and plants, most of the animals, and some of the people died, not able to survive the cold, Jack said. "So what happened?" Connor asked. "Wise Prince White, Snow White's grandfather, rallied up an army to overthrow the Snow Queen," Jack said. "They took back their kingdom and banished the evil Snow Queen to live the rest of her days deep in the northern mountains." "Whatever became of her?" Alex asked. "Some people say she started an army of snowmen and is waiting for the right time to unleash them. Others say she was so distraught after losing the kingdom she cried until her eyes froze and they melted away. Nothing is certain because no one ever saw her again, but her icy wrath still sends chills down people's spines whenever her name is mentioned," Jack said. "So how do people know she's alive?" Alex said. "Oh, she's alive, believe me," Goldilocks said. "The Snow Queen sends vengeful blizzards through the kingdom when she's feeling particularly angry. Just let people know she's still around." Alex and Connor gulped at the same time. "And this scepter of hers, that's what we need," Connor said. "I'm guessing we're going to have to steal it, right? She's not just going to hand it over willingly." In response, Jack and Goldilocks simply continued sharpening their weapons. "Speaking of cold," Goldilocks gestured to Red, who had been staring at the four of them for some time. Red quickly turned away from them, embarrassed to be caught. A week ago, Red had been certain she was in love with Froggy, but as soon as Jack returned to her life, all of the old feelings she had for him slowly started to return as well. She tried to fight him off, telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her heart, but tonight, she watched him tell the twins about the Snow Queen. She couldn't deny that feelings had definitely resurfaced. Froggy, despite his current state, was perfect for her, and everyone she knew agreed. She loved him with all of her heart, but wasn't that how she felt about Jack too? Could she be in love with two people at once? Or worse, could she be in love with one of them and just in denial about how she felt toward the other? But which was which? What could it take for her to be certain? And all the thinking gave Red a headache. "It looks like things are going to get bumpy for us," Frog said to Red. "Excuse me?" Red asked in shock, terrified he could read her mind. Froggy cleared his throat to get Jack and Goldilocks' attention. I don't mind putting a damper on the night, but I believe we may be headed to a certain death unless we do something about it. Everyone's head shot in front of the ship. The Granny was headed straight into the sharp and snowy peaks of the northern mountains. Unless they gained altitude quickly, they were going to crash. Red sighed to herself, relieved Froggy had been referring to her thoughts, but her relief turned to a series of screams as she realized what was happening. Jack leaped up and pulled on the lever by the flame. The flame grew and the Granny rose, but not high enough. The mountain peaks were getting closer, starting to rip a hole right through the ship. Jack pulled the lever as hard as he could, but the flame was as big as it was going to get. The Granny wasn't getting any higher. Oh no, Alex said. What are we going to do? Connor asked. Goldilocks looked around the deck. She ran over to the trunk and chest Red had insisted on bringing and sliced through the ropes and held them down with her swords. One by one, Goldilocks began chucking the chests and trunks overboard. What are you doing? Are you crazy? Red said. She ran over to her beloved items and threw herself on top of them. Don't attempt me to throw you overboard too, Goldilocks said. These are my things. You can't just toss them overboard. I need them, Red yelled. They both grabbed on the handles of the chest and played tug-of-war with it. Goldilocks managed to get over the edge of the ship, but Red wouldn't let it go. Red, you need to listen to me, Goldilocks said, looking her directly in the eyes. You got too much baggage. You need to let go or we'll crash. Red froze. Had Goldilocks heard her thoughts moments before? Had she been thinking out loud and not realized it? Red, we can't go on with all this weighing us down. Do you understand? Goldilocks pleaded with her. I have to let go, Red said to her. I have to let go. She looked up Jack and down to the chest, back to Jack, and slowly let the chest slip out of her grasp and fall into the earth below. She watched it fall until she couldn't see it anymore. Goldilocks wasted no time. She eagerly, almost too eagerly, began hoisting all of Red's trunks and chests over the side of the ship. Jack and the twins joined her. The more they tossed overboard, the higher the Granny rose. Almost, Froggy said. His green hands were almost white from clutching the steering wheel. He was doing his best to navigate the Granny around the sharp peaks. But there was still one more to fly over, and it was exceptionally high. There was only one more trunk to get rid of. It took Jack, Goldilocks, and the twins all their strength to push it up and over the side of the ship. They flew over just in time, and the Granny glided over the mountain peak, inches away from its jagged edge. Jack, Goldilocks, and twins fell to the deck floor. Their hearts were pounding, and they were breathing heavily. Red was leaning on the banister, her eyes fixed on the ground, trying to see where her things had landed, but they were too high to see for her to tell. I need to let go, Red sniffled to herself. I need to let go. After a few moments, the four caught their breath and got to their feet. Red was devastated and wiped away tiny tears that had formed in the corner of her eyes. I'm so sorry we had to throw all your clothes overboard, Alex said. Clothes? Red said. Oh no, those weren't my clothes. Those are just my hats and jewelry. All my clothes are packed in the trunks downstairs. Everyone glared at her as if she was responsible for everything wrong in the world. Does this ship have a plane? Goldilocks asked. She jumped toward Red. Jack and the twins had to hold her back. My dear, for your safety, I think it's best if you go to bed, Froggy told Red. She didn't argue and climbed down the stairs to the lower deck. The Granny bobbed gracefully above the rocky northern mountains. The sun had risen hours ago, but no one could tell through the thick, cloudy sky. The ground looked menacing below. There were no trees or villages, only snow. The twins could have imagined anything living this far north, anything except a Snow Queen. The wind suddenly picked up and the ship rocked harder than it ever had. The cold had become almost unbearable, and the twins wrapped their coats even tighter around themselves. We're getting closer, Jack said. Look! He pointed to the dark sky in the distance. Bright northern lights circled into a vortex above a peculiarly jagged cluster of mountain peaks. We found her! She could be just under those lights, Goldilocks said. Charlie, let's put the Granny down Down gently over there, Jack said, and gestured to a large snow bed they were approaching. Froggy nodded and steered the ship in its direction. Jack lowered the lever by the flame, and the ship descended, settling into the snowy ground. Red poked her head up from the lower deck. "Are we here?" she said with a big yawn, just waking up from a nap. "We'll travel the rest of the way by foot," Jack said. "A large ship hovering over her lair may cause some attention." Goldilocks opened the trunk she had brought to the ship. She and Jack began tucking away as many weapons as possible. Daggers in their boots, knives in their belts, ropes around their waists. They both took a lantern and handed one to the twins. "Are you two sure you're ready for this?" Jack asked. He was very businesslike, but the twins could sense a parental hesitation in his voice. Alex Connor took a deep breath and nodded. "We're ready," they said in unison. "I don't think I packed any snow heels. I might have to sit this one out," Red said. "Great," Jack said. It was the best news he heard all day. "Charlie, you should stay with the ship. If we're not back in a day, come looking for us." "Yes, sir," Froggy said. Jack looked at Goldilocks and the twins. "All right," he said. "Follow me." They climbed off the ship and headed in the direction of the northern lights. It was hard for Alex Connor to keep up with Jack and Goldilocks, particularly because the snow was hard to walk in, and particularly because they weren't used to trekking through the wilderness like Jack and Goldilocks were. As they continued farther north, the wind became stronger and stronger. It almost knocked them down, and the sounds were piercing, like screaming. The Snow Queen's screaming. Perhaps this was part of the wrathful blizzard they had been warned about. After a long while traveling by foot, the twins looked up and saw the northern lights circling the sky directly above them. Jack led them into a small opening between two enormous glaciers, and the harsh winds were blocked. It was like walking in a narrow hallway without a ceiling. "I think it's this way," Jack said to his three followers. They traveled between the glaciers, farther into the mountains of the Snow Queen's lair. The opening between the glaciers zigzagged through the mountains like an icy labyrinth, twisting and turning every few feet. Alex and Connor couldn't tell which direction they were walking in anymore. They were afraid they would get lost, but saw Goldilocks scraping the glacier wall with a dagger as they traveled, making the way back out. They started to hear voices echo through the glacier maze. Jack gestured for them to be as quiet as possible as they walked farther. The group found themselves entering a large crater in the middle of the mountains. A frozen river circled the bottom like a snowy floor, and a frozen waterfall spilled inside from the mountain above. There were several pillars of ice surrounding the frozen river. Everything was white, so it was hard to make out what they were seeing at first. But their eyes began to focus. Alex had to stifle a scream. At the base of the frozen waterfall, the ice flowed like a gigantic chair on which the Snow Queen herself was sitting, there on the edge of an icy throne room. Upon seeing her, Jack and Goldilocks dove behind one pillar and the twins hid behind another. The Snow Queen was a tall woman with a large white fur coat, a snowflake crown, and a cloth wrapped around her eyes. Her skin was so pale and frostbitten it was practically blue. She had a very strong jaw and tiny, jagged teeth. She clutched a long icicle scepter in one hand, and her other hand was being stroked by something enormous and fluffy kneeling over her. It was a polar bear. He blended so well into the rest of the crater, the twins had barely noticed him. "Bear!" Goldilocks gasped. It was the first time the twins had ever seen her afraid of anything. "You're afraid of bears?" Alex whispered. Goldilocks nodded, but her eyes never left the polar bear. "Ever since I was a girl, I went inside the Three Bears' house by mistake," she said. The polar bear gently caressed the Snow Queen's hand, a faithful and obedient servant. "How many people are outside?" the Snow Queen asked him hoarsely. One of the rumors Jack told the twins was true. She was definitely blind. "Thousands and thousands have come today, Your Majesty," the polar bear said, in a deep, growly voice. "What have they come for?" the Snow Queen asked. "They come to bow and grovel at your feet and witness your beauty," the polar bear said. A snide smile came to the Snow Queen's face, and a slow, rattling laugh came from deep inside of her. "Do I still control all the neighboring kingdoms?" the Snow Queen asked. All of them, your majesty, the bear said. The whole world is covered in your snowy wrath, just as it was before. The Snow Queen's smile grew wider. What gifts does my army have for me today, she asked. I'll call for them, your majesty, he asked. The polar bear let a booming growl, and moments later another polar bear appeared. He carried 2 long poles with several pairs of boots tied to them. He raised the poles and lowered them to the ground as he walked, giving the Snow Queen the illusion that dozens of soldiers were marching to the crater. My faithful army has returned, the pleased Snow Queen said. What have you brought me this time? Jewels, my queen, the second polar bear said. He set the poles aside and carefully dropped a handful of average rocks into her hands. Rubies, diamonds, and sapphires, all your majesty's favorites. The Snow Queen gasped. These are the biggest jewels I've ever held, she said. You made your queen very proud. The polar bears looked to each other in relieved to have pulled off another hoax. The second polar bear retreated to the poles and walked off behind the waterfall, marching the boots along with him. Everything she believes is a lie, Connor whispered to his sister. I wonder how long those polar bears have been fooling her, Alex whispered back. Psst, Jack said, getting the twins' attention. I'm going to distract the bear. The 3 of you get the scepter. They all nodded. Jack picked up a chunk of ice and threw it to the other side of the crater's rim. The polar bear jerked his head toward the sound. He scowled, waiting for it to happen again, and then looked back at the Snow Queen when it didn't. Jack threw an even bigger chunk of ice at the same direction. The polar bear looked toward and sniffed the air. He let out a low growl and bared his teeth. He knew he had company. What is it? The Snow Queen asked. Nothing, your majesty, the polar bear said. Please excuse me for a moment. The polar bear walked off to inspect the sound and disappearance from few behind the pillars on the other side of the crater. I'm going to keep them busy, Jack mouthed to Goldilocks, and the twins then followed the bear. The Snow Queen was all alone. Now was their chance. I say, we must just go over there and tackle her, Connor suggested. No, I'm going to try to steal on my own first, Goldilocks said. Stay here and keep a lookout. Whistle if you see anything. Goldilocks carefully stepped into the frozen lake and made her way to the Snow Queen's throne. As one would expect from a master thief, she was very agile, barely making a sound. Goldilocks was halfway there. The twins crossed their fingers. They were watching her so intently they forgot to keep an eye out for the rest of the crater. Just when she was a few feet away from the Snow Queen, a small piece of ice crunched loudly under her foot. Who's there? The Snow Queen yelled, and raised her scepter. Suddenly, the polar bear reappeared from behind the pillars and charged towards Goldilocks. With one swipe of his paw, he knocked Goldilocks to the ground, and she slid to the crater of the frozen lake. Goldilocks! Jack screamed, emerging from behind the pillars himself. He reached toward the polar bear with his axe raised high. The Snow Queen heard him and pointed its scepter directly at him. A bright, icy blast erupted from its tip and hit Jack. He flew across the crater and crashed into a pillar. He scrambled to his feet, but was hit again by another icy blast from the Snow Queen. This time, a sheet of thick ice pinned to his hands and the chest to the pillar behind him. Jack struggled with all his might, but he was stuck. Although he was blind, the Snow Queen apparently had impeccable hearing. Who dares disturb my palace? The Snow Queen demanded. Goldilocks was hyperventilating on the ground, terrified of the polar bear before her. The Snow Queen glided toward her. Leave her alone, Jack yelled from across the crater, desperately struggling to free himself. The Snow Queen raised his scepter in Goldilocks' direction, but just then a giant snowball came out of nowhere and hit the Snow Queen square in the face. Hey, abominable snow woman, over here! Connor yelled at her. The Snow Queen let out a furious moan, and the twins could see her breath in the cold air. The polar bear roared and lunged toward them, but the Snow Queen stopped him. No, you stay here, she ordered. I want to kill them myself. The twins didn't waste a beat and took off running. The Snow Queen went after them, following the sound of their footsteps. They ran behind the frozen waterfall and found themselves entering a large cavern. The polar bear slowly walked towards Goldilocks. His sharp teeth were exposed, and drool was dripping from his salivating mouth. No one disturbs the Snow Queen and lives to see another day, the polar bear growled. Goldie, get up! Jack yelled. You have to get up. I can't, she whimpered, sliding away from the approaching bear as fast as he could. "What's the matter?" the polar bear asked her. "I'm too close for comfort?" "Actually," Goldilocks said, "you're exactly where I want you." Goldilocks retrieved her sword and hit the frozen lake as hard as she could. A large crack bolted across the lake straight to the polar bear. The ice under his feet caved, and the polar bear fell straight through the freezing water below. "That's my girl," Jack hollered proudly. "Woohoo!" Goldilocks got to her feet and caught her breath. It was very rare for her heart to race this fast. She carefully looked down at the hole in the ice, waiting for the polar bear to resurface. But the water refroze before he had the chance. Goldilocks ran over to Jack. She reached into her boot and pulled out a few matches and struck against her belt. She had the small flames against the ice, trapping him. "We have to hurry," Goldilocks said. "The twins are in trouble." Alex Connor ran through the cavern with the SnowQueen hot on their trail. They were barely avoiding the icy blast she sent toward them. "Come back here," she demanded. The cavern was full of enormous icicles protruding from both the ceiling and the floor, as if the twins had discovered the mountain's teeth. There was very little light, but the ice was extremely reflective. The twins could see themselves everywhere they looked. As if the situation couldn't get worse, twins ran smack into the second polar bear. He was standing at a long ice table, sorting through the collection of props, pots, pans, bells, whistles, pieces of metal, and blocks of wood. Everything the bear needed to keep the SnowQueen's ears believing their charade. The polar bear sneered down the twins, and they bolted in the opposite direction. "How dare you intrude my palace!" the SnowQueen screamed, blasting the icicles into pieces near the twins. "You're not in a palace. The bears have been lying to you," Alex shouted back at her. "You live in the mountains. You haven't conquered anything," Connor added. "They're liars, my queen," the polar bear proclaimed. "We would never do something like that to you." "To your left, my queen." The SnowQueen pointed her scepter to her left, and an icy beam hit the ice directly to the twins' left. Thankfully, the polar bear had mistaken their reflection for the real twins. To your right, my queen," the polar bear shouted, acting as her eyes. The SnowQueen blasted away the icicle directly to the twins' right, missing them by inches. "Connor, I hate to say this, but I think it might be smart to split up," Connor said, finishing his sister's sentence. They separated and ran in different directions. It looked like there were dozens of Alexes and Connors running through the cavern now. "Ahead of you, my queen," the polar bear shouted. The SnowQueen followed his instructions and fired icy blasts in every direction he told her. "To your right, behind you. To your left, to your front. Behind you again, to your side," the polar bear instructed. Alex Connor running in circles around them. The SnowQueen was going to blast the entire cavern away if she wasn't careful. "Now to your side. Turn around. One is right behind you." "He's getting away! Quickly, to your left!" the polar bear yelled. The SnowQueen shot a strong blast to her left, and the cavern went silent. "Well," the SnowQueen grunted, "where are they?" Alex Connor looked back, and the polar bear was frozen in a block of ice. In her attempts to shoot them, the SnowQueen had hit him. The SnowQueen grew frustrated and yelled so loud the entire cavern started to shake. The cavern rumbled, and the twins looked up to see a massive avalanche rolling straight toward them. Connor dived behind an icicle. Alex hid under the ice table. The avalanche swept through the cavern and engulfed the SnowQueen. She screamed as it crashed into her. The wave of snow settled and the cavern was dead silent. Alex peeked her head up from the table. The SnowQueen was lying on the ground, covered in a mound of snow. Her crown had been knocked off, and her scepter was lying nearby. Alex cautiously walked over to her. Was she dead? Could she hear her approaching? Alex leaned down and picked up the scepter. Just her hand wrapped around it, the SnowQueen grabbed onto Alex's forearm and pulled her in close. The claw slid off her lids, and Alex was staring into bright lights instead of eyes. "Of the 4 travelers, one will not return," the SnowQueen rasped. Then the lights faded into nothing but empty eye sockets. The SnowQueen's hand around Alex went limp, and she fell unconscious. Alex didn't understand what had just happened. Had the SnowQueen just given her a prophecy? "You got it!" Connor said excitedly and ran up to his sister. He was covered in snow, but he was jumping for joy. "Yeah, I did, Alex said, still unsure how to process what the Snow Queen had just told her. Jack and Goldilocks charged into the cavern. They were so relieved to see the twins. They took one look at the frozen polar bear and the trapped Snow Queen and laughed. Jack playfully nudged Goldilocks. And you were worried they were in danger, he said. Jack, you look out, Connor yelled. Jack dodged just in time to miss being slashed with a claw. The other polar bear had managed to get out of the frozen lake and appeared behind them. He was soaked and furious. He leaped towards Jack and Goldilocks, ready to tear them apart. Alex pointed the scepter of the polar bear, and an icy beam hit him in the chest. He froze in mid-air and hit the ground, trapped in ice. Well, I'm ready for this snow day to be over, Connor said. Let's get out of here before the bears thaw out, Goldilocks said. The group found the opening in the glaciers, and they had entered through the followed marks. Goldilocks let back in the harsh winds. They traveled south until they found the granny right where they had left it. You're back, Froggy said, and literally leaped for joy as they climbed aboard the ship. Well, how did it go? Did you get the scepter? Alex showed him the Snow Queen's scepter. Boy, do we have a story to tell you. Story for you, she said. But before Alex could even start, Reddy emerged from the lower deck. Oh, good, you're all back. You won't believe what happened to me while you were gone, she said. We won't believe what happened to you, Connor asked. Wondering what could top defeating polar bears and a Snow Queen. Red was cradling something in her arms like a baby. As she neared the others, they could see it was furry and had 4 paws. I got a puppy, Red said, and happily showed them the small dog sleeping in her arms. Where did you get a puppy, Alex asked. I grew a little impatient waiting for you to return. Oh, I see you got the scepter. Well done. Anyway, I went for a walk and passed the time, and I found this little guy wandering around the snow alone. He was helpless, starving, and adorable, so I had to adopt him, Red explained. No one knew what to say. Anything they could have said about retrieving the scepter wouldn't have been nearly interesting to hear as the pup in their arms. Did you name him, Connor asked? I named him Claudius, Red informed him. I named him after one of the characters from my favorite Shaky Fruit and play, Hamhead. Froggy hit his forehead with an open hand. Hamlet, my dear, he corrected her. Yes, that's the one, she said. But I'm going to spell it with a W. Wouldn't that be fine? Claudius with a W. Do you get it? Everyone nodded along with her like she was with a 3-year-old child, except for Goldilocks. She was staring daggers at Red. You probably don't get it, Red said, and explained to her further. If I spell it with a W, the word claw would be in his name, like an animal claw. You get it now? Say it with me, Goldie. Claudius. Goldilocks looked down at the small dog and then backed up at Red with a smile. He's very cute. Congratulations. The others did a double take. They had never seen Goldilocks collect herself so effortlessly before. Thank you, Red said. She climbed the steps back down to the lower deck, rocking her new pet as she went. Oh my, what cute paws you have, Claudius. Oh my, what precious little eyes you have. Oh my, what pointy little ears you have. Goldilocks began unloading all her weapons, chuckling as she did. That was big of you, Connor said to her. What's so amusing, Jack asked. Red is in a rude awakening, Goldilocks said. Oh dear, Froggy said. Why is that? A sly smile came to Goldilocks' face. I recognize one of those anywhere. That's not a puppy. It's a wolf cub. That is the end of Chapter 17. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more from The Land of Stories, The Enchantress Returns. And also more books to come in the later future. And for all the moms out here, I hope you had a wonderful Mother's Day with you and your kids. And I hope everyone enjoys the reading. Have a safe day. Bye.